personality disorder, personality disorder, personality disorder, personality disorder, personality disorder, personality disorder. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Maxine. I have avoidant personality disorder and ADHD. And today I'm not wearing my glasses because the light was reflecting off them too much and it was annoying me. So even though I feel like I have no facial features now, this is what we're working with. Today I really want to talk about schizoid personality disorder and its relationship, its similarities and differences to avoidant personality disorder. And this is because I know there's a couple of you in the comments that have expressed that you have SPD and that you can relate to some degree to my content, which I think is amazing. My content is for anybody that gets any value from it, so I'm happy to have you. But it's also known for being kind of similar to avoidant personality disorder, and I didn't know much about it until it was brought up in the comments here, but as I researched it for this video, I find that not confusing. I can totally see the relationship between the two, absolutely. But from my perspective as somebody with avoidant personality disorder, it's the root of those disorders are actually very, very different. And although I know some of you have also stated that you've sort of oscillated or moved from avoidant personality disorder into schizoid, and I can see how that could happen too. I do maintain the theory that all personality disorders across the board are likely our human way of neatly categorizing these different manifestations of basically CPTSD, because we know that the root of these disorders is some form of childhood or adolescent trauma. So really, there are common threads throughout all personality disorders. But when comparing and contrasting, it's really quite fascinating how similar these two disorders can look, but when you get to the root of it, they, from my perspective, are actually quite different. So I'm going to start with just going over the criteria for both. I know we've talked about the AVPD criteria a bunch on this channel, but if this is your first video, I'm going to go through it briefly as a refresher. So starting with avoidant personality, there are 7 criteria for both, and I believe to qualify for either disorder, you must meet a minimum of 4 of the criteria. So, avoidant personality disorder avoids occupational activities involving significant interpersonal contact due to fears of criticism, disapproval, or rejection, is unwilling to get involved with people unless certain of acceptance, shows restraint within intimate relationships due to fears of shame or ridicule, preoccupied with fears of receiving criticism or rejection in social situations, inhibited in new interpersonal situations due to feelings of inadequacy, considers self as inferior to others, socially inept, or personally unappealing, and is unusually reluctant to take personal risks or engage in any new activities because they may prove embarrassing. So that's avoidant personality. Schizoid personality is no desire for or enjoyment of close relationships, including those with family members. Strong preference for solitary activities. Little, if any, interest in sexual activity with other people. Enjoyment of few, if any, activities. Lack of close friends and confidants. Apparent indifference to praise or criticism. Emotional coldness, detachment, or flattened affect. So that's the schizoid profile. So as you can see, when it's written out like that, they are quite different. But in practice, the way that these will look as somebody moves through the world could be quite similar. As you can see, of course, strong preference for solitary activities. Well, those of us with avoidant personality disorder might experience this preference for solitary activities. We might enjoy few, if any, activities. We might experience emotional coldness or flattened affect. Most of these things seem to be, they could also be symptoms of depression, which we know often coincides with avoidant personality disorder. When you want to have relationships, but you don't because you are afraid, then that is going to lead to depression most of the time. And you can experience this lack of enjoyment for activities, this flattened affect, this preference for being alone. But the root of these behaviors is completely different. So avoidant personality disorder is a cluster C personality disorder, which cluster C is anxious and fearful personality disorder types. That's like the root of it, right? We're anxious and fearful of the risks that we're taking in pursuing relationships. So we often avoid doing those to avoid taking that risk. Whereas schizoid personality is rooted, I think, it's a cluster A, which I forget what they classify that as. It's something kind of, it's like odd behaviors or something like that. Like it's kind of a weird description of the cluster A personality types. I don't remember off the top of my head, so I'll put it here if I was wrong. But so the root of their avoidant behavior is just sort of disinterest, malaise. Really disinterest seems like the best word to describe it. They just are not interested in having these relationships. They don't feel much, so they don't feel inclined to form relationships with other people. So of course, yes, that's going to look very, very similar, especially from an outside perspective. But the root feeling is very different. So if you're struggling to identify, if you're at that point where you're struggling to identify which of these disorders fits you, it's really about how you feel. When discussing in the comments with people that have schizoid personality disorder, I tell them I choose to disassociate from my feelings as often as possible. I make that choice. I've used drugs. I've used, escapism through movies and video games and books and things like that. Keeping distracted, wanting to always be distracted. I do that on purpose, though, to escape these very, very just incredibly intense emotions that I am always feeling just bubbling under the surface about my inadequacy and my fear of rejection and humiliation and disapproval. And it seems to me like if you have schizoid personality disorder, you're not going to struggle with any of that. You're not concerned about how other people are perceiving you. You just like are not worried about that. So for me, like, I can't picture myself ever not having that intense fear and anxiety. For those of you that have said that you can sort of experience both or have at different points in your life, I'm not invalidating that at all. We're all different, and like I said, all personality disorders are like related in one way or another. And I do believe that. I could see how in some people with certain personalities, a prolonged period of loneliness and depression due to AVPD could eventually lead to something that looks more like schizoid. If you just have been alone so much for so long that you kind of are able to shed the care of even wanting these other relationships. Like, I could see how for some people that would happen. For me, I can't imagine it, but I could see how that would be the case for some people. Also, I could totally see how if somebody with AVPD is heavily medicated for like anxiety or with mood stabilizers or something like that, that if they were able to shed that anxious/fearful core of AVPD, how that could directly lead to something more like schizoid personality disorder instead of just healing you. It's like, do you guys remember that clickhole, that like parody quote by Ashley Olsen that was like, I think the difference between me and Mary Kate is obvious. She thinks the opposite of fire is water, and I think the opposite of fire is no fire. That's like how I feel about this. It's almost like the opposite of avoidant personality disorder could be like just being very outgoing, but and confident, or the opposite of avoidant personality disorder could be schizoid personality disorder, because it's like just the opposite of this intense fear of criticism is just sort of a disinterest in other people, what they think, what they're doing, like just not even thinking about that anymore. But they're not really opposites. It just made me think of that. Yeah. So I don't know. I'm just spitballing here. I just thought I would, like I said, I hadn't really looked into this at all until recently. And I just thought it was very, very interesting how similar but different these two personality disorders are, and how these different sort of core issues can outwardly reflect to look so similar. I think SPD is also probably very, very comorbid, or easily confused perhaps with autism spectrum disorder. I could totally see how those could get confused, and I feel that way about avoidant personality disorder too. So they're totally they're totally similar, but I just wanted to speak on, from my perspective, having avoidant personality disorder, how different they also are. So that's it for this video. I'll leave the link for the Discord down below. I think in future videos, I'm definitely going to be discussing the similarities and differences in AVPD and like vulnerable narcissism. And also I'm going to be talking about the other cluster C disorders, which are dependent personality disorder and obsessive compulsive personality disorder, which is different than OCD. But those are the other two anxious/fearful disorders. And if you meet the criteria for diagnosis for AVPD, it's quite likely that you will have at least a few traits from one or both of the other cluster Cs. Not always, but I do. I have a few DPD traits, so I figured I would talk about those in a future video. So I never say this, but subscribe if you're interested in that. And also, please feel free to comment down below if there are any topics that I haven't talked about yet that you would like my insight on. And with that, thank you guys so much for watching. I love you. I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.